Adrian Wilson FZS was an English physician, polar explorer, natural historian, painter and ornithologist. Early life: born in 91 Montpellier Terrace, Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, on 23 July 1872. Wilson was the second son and fifth child of physician Dr. Edward Thomas Wilson and his wife, Mary Agnes, and Q.T. Winshaw. A clever, sensitive but boisterous boy, he developed a love of the countryside, natural history and drawing from an early age. He was sent as a boarder to a preparatory school in Clifton, Bristol, but after failing to gain a scholarship to public school, he attended Cheltenham College for Boys as a day pupil. His mother was a poultry breeder and he spent much of his youth at the Crippett's farm, Leckhampton near Cheltenham. By the age of 9 he had announced to his parents that he was going to become a naturalist. With encouragement and tuition from his father, he started to draw pictures of the wildlife and fauna in the fields around the farm. After passing his Oxford and Cambridge exams with honours in science, in 1891 he went to Gonville and Caius College, Cambridge, where he read natural sciences, obtaining a first-class degree in 1894. It was during his time there that he developed the deep Christian faith and asceticism by which he lived his life. He studied for his Bachelor of Medicine degree at St George's Hospital Medical School, London, and undertook mission work in the slums of Battersea in his spare time. In February 1898, shortly before qualifying as a doctor, Wilson became seriously ill and was diagnosed with pulmonary tuberculosis, contracted during his mission work. During a long convalescence from this illness he spent months in Norway and Switzerland, time he used to practice and develop his skills as an artist. He qualified in medicine in 1900 and the next year was appointed junior house surgeon at Cheltenham General Hospital. He married Oriana Super on 16 July 1901, just 3 weeks before setting off for the Antarctic as a member of Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery Expedition. Antarctica. Wilson took part in 2 British expeditions to Antarctica, the Discovery Expedition and the Terra expedition, both under the leadership of Scott. Discovery Expedition from 1901 to 1904, Wilson acted as junior surgeon, zoologist and expedition artist, setting off with the expedition on 6 August 1901. They reached Antarctica in January 1902. On 2 November 1902, Wilson, Scott and Ernest Shackleton set off on a journey that, at the time, was the southernmost trek achieved by any explorer. The party had dogs, but they were not experienced in using them and the food brought for the dogs had gone bad. With many of the dogs dead, they turned back on 31 December 1902, having reached latitude 82 degrees 17'. They had traveled 300 miles farther south than anyone before them and were only 480 miles from the pole. Shackleton was deteriorating rapidly, coughing blood and suffering fainting spells and unable to help pull the sledge. Scott and Wilson, themselves suffering, struggled to get the party home. It was a close call, but 93 days after setting off, having covered 960 miles, they reached the Discovery in safety in February 1903. The following month, Shackleton, having suffered particularly badly from scurvy and exhaustion, was sent home early by Scott on the relief ship Morning. On his return, Shackleton asked Wilson to join his Nimrod expedition to Antarctica in 1907, but partly out of loyalty to Scott, he declined. Terra Nova expedition on 15 June 1910. Wilson set sail from Cardiff on the Terra Nova as chief of the scientific staff of Scott's final expedition. After making stops in Madeira, South Trinidad, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand, the Terra Nova was trapped for 3 weeks by pack ice, and finally arrived at Cape Evans in McMurdo Sound in early January 1911. A base camp hut was built and 3 weeks later work began to establish the supply depots in preparation for the journey to the South Pole the following austral spring. Deteriorating weather conditions and weak, unacclimatized ponies meant that the main supply point, 1-ton depot, was laid 35 miles further north of its planned location at 80 degrees south, something that was to prove critical during the return journey from the pole the following year. In the austral winter of 1911, Wilson led the winter journey, a journey with Henry Robertson Bowers and Apsley Cherry Garrard, to the emperor penguin breeding grounds at Cape Crozier to collect eggs for scientific study. The 60-mile journey was made in almost total darkness, with temperatures reaching as low as -70 degrees Fahrenheit. Frozen and exhausted, they reached the goal only to be stopped by a blizzard, during which the tent was ripped away and carried off by the wind, leaving the men trapped in the sleeping bags for a day and a half under a thickening drift of snow. When the wind subsided, by great fortune they found the tent lodged about half a mile away in rocks. Having successfully collected 3 eggs, and desperately exhausted, they returned to Cape Evans on the 1st of August 1911, 5 weeks after setting off. Cherry Garrard later described this expedition in his memoir, The Worst Journey in the World. On the 1st of November 1911, 14 men set off from Cape Evans on the long trip to the South Pole. 79 days later, Wilson was one of the 5-man polar party that reached the pole on the 18th of January 1912, only to find the pole had been claimed by Norwegian Roald Amundsen and his team just 5 weeks earlier. The return journey soon became a desperate affair due to the combination of exhaustion, lack of nutrients in the diet and exceptionally adverse weather. On the 17th of February, near the base of the Beardmore Glacier, Petty Officer Edgar Evans died, suspected to be from a brain injury sustained after a fall into a crevasse 2 weeks earlier. Then, in a vain attempt to save his companions, Captain Lawrence Oates deliberately walked out of the tent to his death on the 16th of March after his frostbitten feet developed gangrene. Wilson, Scott and Bowers continued on for 3 more days, progressing 20 more miles, but were stopped by a blizzard on the 20th of March, 11 miles short of the 1-ton food depot that could have saved them. The blizzard continued for days, longer than they had fuel and food for. Too weak, cold and hungry to continue, they died in the tent on or soon after the 29th of March, still 148 miles from the base camp. The bodies were found by a search party the following spring on the 12th of November 1912. The tent was collapsed over them by the search party, who then buried them where they lay, under a snow cairn, topped by a cross made from a pair of skis. When news of the tragedy reached Britain in February 1913, it created a national mourning, affectionately nicknamed Uncle Bill by the men of the expedition. Wilson was the confidant of many, respected for his judgment, skills at mediation and dedication to others. By all accounts, Wilson was probably Scott's closest comrade of the expedition. Scott wrote, "Words must always fail me when I talk of Bill Wilson. I believe he really is the finest character I ever met. Quote, when Scott's final camp was discovered by a search team in November 1912, Bowers and Wilson were found frozen in the sleeping bags. Scott's bag was opened and his body partially out of his bag. His left arm was extended across Wilson. In 1913 he was posthumously awarded the Patrons Medal by the Royal Geographical Society for his work in the Antarctic. At Gonville and Keyes College, the college's flag, which Wilson took to the South Pole, is preserved. In media. In the film Scott of the Antarctic, Wilson was played by Harold Warrender. In the Central TV production The Last Place on Earth, Wilson was played by Stephen Moore. In the BBC 4 production The Worst Journey in the World, Wilson was played by John Arthur. Memorials. The statue of Wilson on the promenade in Cheltenham, modelled by Scott's widow Kathleen, was unveiled on the 9th of July 1914 by Arctic explorer Sir Clements Markham. In September 2013, the Cheltenham Art Gallery and Amp Museum was renamed the Wilson in his honour. There is a large block of flats named after him in Hester's Way, Cheltenham. The Edward Wilson Primary School in Paddington, London is named after him. The Students' Cafe at St George's Hospital Medical School is named Eddie Wilson's.